The sun was dying, and humanity had nowhere to run. 300 years before the events that would shake the galaxy to its core, Earth's star began to collapse in ways that no scientist could explain. And the 8 billion humans living on their small blue world watched their sky turn orange and knew that death was coming for all of them. They had perhaps 50 years before the radiation would make Earth uninhabitable, and their technology was primitive by galactic standards, barely capable of reaching their own moon with any reliability, let alone escaping to distant stars where safety might be found in desperation. The United Earth government broadcast a message on every frequency they could reach, a plea that traveled outward into the vast darkness of space, begging anyone who might hear them to help a dying species find a new home. For 3 long years, silence was the only answer, and many humans began to lose hope entirely. Then the Concord of 12 responded. They came in ships that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children's toys. Vessels that could cross the galaxy in days rather than centuries. And they looked upon the small, frightened species with what humans mistook for compassion, but was actually something far more. Calculating the Concord was an alliance of the 12, oldest and most powerful species in the known galaxy. Beings who had traveled between stars when humanity's ancestors were still learning to walk upright. And they had resources beyond anything Earth's people could imagine. The Volcari offered their massive arc ships, living vessels that could carry billions of passengers across the impossible distances between stars. And their High Matriarch herself came to Earth to present this gift with great ceremony. The Thesan contributed their terraforming technology, machines that could transform a dead rock into a living world within a single generation. Making new Earths where none had existed before, the Morthani opened their ancient jump gates, shortcuts through space itself that would allow humanity to reach their new home in weeks rather than millennia. A gift of time that seemed beyond price, one by one. Each of the 12 contributed something essential to humanity's survival. And Earth's leaders wept with gratitude at the generosity of these elder races who had heard their cry and answered with such abundance. But nothing in the galaxy was truly free on the day the evacuation began, as the first human refugees boarded the Volcari arc ships that would carry them to safety. The ambassadors of the Concord presented humanity's leaders with a document called the Compact of Obligation. You must understand, the Volcari matriarch explained in her rumbling voice, that the Concord operates on a simple principle that has maintained order in the galaxy for millions of years. And that principle is this: all debts must eventually be paid. The compact was a binding treaty, encoded into galactic law itself, witnessed by all 12 species and enforceable by the combined might of the Concord's fleets. And its terms were deceptively simple for the gift of salvation. Humanity owed each of the 12 a debt of equal value, and the nature of each repayment would be determined by the creditor species whenever they chose to call upon it, with no time limit and no possibility of refusal. What if we cannot pay what is asked? The human representative asked, his voice trembling slightly as he held the document in his hands. The Morthane ambassador, a creature of flowing silver that seemed to shift between liquid and solid, answered with what might have been amusement. Then the full force of the Concord will ensure compliance, as has been done with other species who thought they could escape their obligations. Though we are certain such measures will never be necessary with your grateful and humble people. Humanity signed the compact because they had no other choice. The evacuation took 20 years, during which 8 billion humans were transported to a cluster of systems in the Kepler expanse, a region of space that the Concord considered barely worth noticing. Far from the centers of galactic power and commerce, the Thesan machines transformed 3 dead worlds into places where humans could breathe and grow food and build new lives. And slowly the refugees began to rebuild what they had lost in the halls of the Concord. Humanity was classified as a minor species, politically insignificant and militarily negligible, useful perhaps as a source of labor or curiosity, but certainly not worthy of serious attention from the great powers that had ruled the galaxy. Since time beyond memory, the elder races watched humanity with benign disinterest, the way a person might watch ants building a hill in their garden, noting their activity with mild amusement, but never considering them a threat or even a factor in the grand calculations of galactic politics. This was their first mistake in the decades that followed the evacuation. Human ambassadors were quiet and humble in Concord meetings, always sitting in the back rows and speaking only when spoken to, expressing endless gratitude for the salvation they had received and asking for nothing more than the right to exist in peace. Human merchant ships were small and unassuming, traveling only the routes they were assigned and never venturing into territories where they had not been explicitly invited. Their captains polite and deferential to every species they encountered. Human military forces were described in official reports as adequate for local defense, a handful of patrol ships protecting their borders from pirates. Nothing that could ever threaten even the smallest Concord member. The galaxy forgot about humanity almost entirely, which was exactly what humanity wanted, because while the Concord saw a species of grateful refugees slowly building a modest civilization in their remote corner of space, something very different was happening behind closed doors in the Kepler expanse. Humanity They remembered the fear of watching their sun die, and, knowing that extinction was coming, they remembered the humiliation of begging for survival, of pleading with alien powers for the right to continue existing. They remembered the Concord ambassadors speaking slowly and using simple words, as if addressing children or pets, rather than the representatives of a sentient species. Most of all, they remembered the compact of obligation, and they understood what the elder races truly intended someday. Each of the 12 would call in their debt, and humanity would be expected to pay whatever was demanded without question or complaint, becoming servants or slaves or worse to beings who saw them as nothing more than assets to be used. The leaders of the new human civilization gathered in secret and made a decision that would shape the next 300 years of their history. They would prepare. They would watch and learn and grow strong in ways the galaxy would never suspect. And when the debts were finally called, humanity would pay them in full, but not in the way the Concord expected, not in the way anyone expected. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before a wall of screens that showed the true extent of human power. And even after 30 years of service, she still felt a thrill of pride at what her species had accomplished in secret. The room was buried deep beneath the surface of New Tokyo, the capital world of the Kepler expanse, hidden behind layers of rock and steel and technology designed to fool any sensor that the Concord might point in their direction. On those screens were images of ships that officially did not exist. Fleets that would have made the elder races choke on their arrogance if they had known the truth. Weapons platforms and carriers and vessels of war that humanity had been building in hidden shipyards for nearly 3 centuries. Status report, Tanaka said to her assembled commanders. Men and women who had dedicated their lives to a plan that might not see completion in their lifetimes. The 7th Hidden Fleet has completed construction at Facility Omega, reported Admiral Chung, a man whose grandfather had been one of the first strategists to outline what they called the Ledger Protocol. And our stealth technology continues to improve beyond anything the Concord has developed in the last 1,000,000 years. This was the great secret of humanity's survival strategy when the Thesan had given them terraforming technology. Human scientists had taken it apart piece by piece and figured out how it worked, then spent decades improving upon designs that the elder races had considered perfect for eons when the Morthani had opened their jump gates. Human engineers had studied the principles behind them and eventually built their own network. Gates that connected human space in ways the Concord could never detect or control. Every gift that had been given in supposed generosity had been examined and mastered and surpassed. Because humanity understood something that the ancient species had forgotten in their millions of years of dominance. Technology that stands still is technology that dies. The Concord had stopped innovating countless millennia ago, satisfied with achievements that had served them well enough for longer than most species existed. Seeing no need to improve what already worked, humanity had never stopped pushing forward, driven by the memory of near extinction and the knowledge that someday they would need every advantage they could create. "What about intelligence gathering?" Tanaka asked, turning to a woman whose official title was cultural attached, but whose real job was running the largest spy network in galactic history. "We have agents in every Concord species," the woman reported with quiet satisfaction, including 3 members of the Valkyrie matriarch's personal staff, 2 advisors to the Thesan High Council, and at least 1 individual who attends Morthani strategic planning sessions. "And the weaknesses we've identified, compiled and updated weekly, Admiral, with specific response plans for each of the 12 based on their culture, psychology, military capabilities, and economic dependencies." This was the heart of the Ledger Protocol, the plan that generations of human strategists had refined and perfected over 300 years of patient preparation for each species in the Concord. Humanity had prepared a specific way to pay their debt that would satisfy the exact legal requirements of the compact while serving human interests, rather than the interests of their creditors. The Valkyrie were slavers who valued nothing more than the acquisition of servants from other species. So humanity had prepared a response that would turn their demand for slaves into something that would shatter their empire. From within, the Thesan were obsessed with genetic experimentation and would certainly demand biological samples from humanity. So plans were in place to give them exactly what they asked for in a way they would deeply regret. The Morthani controlled the jump gates that connected the galaxy and would likely demand territory or tribute for continued access. But humanity no longer needed their gates and had prepared to demonstrate this fact with devastating effect. Every possible demand had been anticipated, analyzed, and countered. "There is one matter that requires your attention," said the intelligence chief, her voice dropping slightly. "Regarding the Valkyrie specifically." Tanaka raised an eyebrow and waited. "Our scientists discovered something 60 years ago that we have kept hidden from the entire galaxy, including the Valkyrie themselves, at enormous effort and expense." "Go on." "Their sun is dying, Admiral, much like Earth's sun died 300 years ago, though through a different mechanism that our astronomers understand far better than they understood our own stellar collapse." The room went silent as the implications of this statement settled over the assembled commanders. "The Valkyrie have no idea," the intelligence chief continued, "because we have been manipulating their astronomical data for decades, bribing and replacing scientists, altering sensor readings, doing everything necessary to ensure they remain ignorant of their approaching doom." "How long do they have?" Tanaka asked. "If we do nothing." "Approximately 6 hours after we choose to reveal the truth." Admiral Tanaka allowed herself a small smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "The Valkyrie gave us transport when our world was dying," she said slowly. "And the compact states that we must repay a debt of equal value." "Exactly." "Admiral, prepare the evacuation fleet, the one we've been building for this exact scenario, and make sure every ship is crewed and ready to move on my command. It will be done. 300 years of preparation, of secrecy, of watching and waiting and building in the shadows, while the galaxy dismissed humanity as irrelevant refugees grateful for whatever scraps. They were given 300 years of teaching each new generation that the debt would someday be called, and that humanity must be ready to pay it in a way that would change everything. The waiting was almost over intelligence. Reports indicated that the Valkyrie matriarch was preparing to formally invoke the Compact of Obligation, demanding the first payment that humanity owed for their salvation. And the nature of that demand was exactly what human strategists had predicted centuries ago. They wanted slaves. The matriarch would demand 1 million humans to serve aboard the great arc ships, the same vessels that had carried humanity to safety, expecting the small grateful species to comply without resistance. Because what choice did they have? Against the combined might of the Concord, she would learn that humanity always had choices. She would learn that 300 years was a very long time to prepare. She would learn what it meant to underestimate a species that remembered every slight and planned for every possibility, and through her, the entire galaxy would learn that when humanity paid its debts, the payment would be made on human terms. Tanaka dismissed her commanders and stood alone before the screens showing her hidden fleets, her patient weapons, her species' secret strength. Soon, she whispered to the darkness. Very soon. Ambassador David Chun had served humanity in the halls of galactic power for 40 years, playing the role of humble representative from a minor species with such skill that even he sometimes forgot it was a performance today. That performance would end. He stood in the great throne room of the Valkyrie homeworld, surrounded by beings that towered over him like living mountains of muscle and chitin, their multiple eyes watching him with the casual contempt that the powerful always showed to those they considered beneath them. The High Matriarch sat upon a throne carved from the bones of species that had failed to pay their debts in the distant past. A reminder to all visitors of what happened to those who defied the Concord's will. Human ambassador, she rumbled, her voice shaking the very air with its depth and power. You have been summoned to discuss the matter of your species' obligation to the Valkyrie people. Chum bowed low, exactly as protocol demanded, giving no sign that his heart was racing with anticipation rather than fear. I am honored to serve. Great Matriarch, 300 years ago, we gave your dying species the gift of transport across the stars, carrying your billions to safety when you had no other hope of survival. We remember your generosity with eternal gratitude. The matriarch leaned forward, her massive form casting Chun into shadow. The time has come for repayment, and the terms are simple. 1 million of your people will be given to us as servants, to crew our arc ships as generations of other species have done before you. The assembled Valkyrie courtiers made sounds of approval, anticipating the terror and despair that always appeared on the faces of lesser species when such demands were made. They saw no terror on David Chun's face. They saw a smile. Great Matriarch, Chum said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. The Compact of Obligation states that humanity must pay a debt of equal value to what was given. And you are correct that the Valkyrie gave us transport in our hour of need. Then you accept our terms? I accept that a debt is owed, but the nature of that debt is transport for transport, not slaves for transport. The matriarch's eyes narrowed with dangerous anger. You dare to argue semantics with the Valkyrie. I dare to fulfill the exact letter of our agreement, Chun replied. And something in his voice made several courtiers step backward without understanding why. Because humanity always pays its debts in full. He raised his hand to his ear, activating a communication device that the Valkyrie security forces had somehow failed to detect. Admiral Tanaka, you may proceed. For a moment nothing happened, and the matriarch began to laugh. A terrible sound like grinding stones. Then every screen in the throne room activated simultaneously, showing images that froze the laughter in her throat. 1,000 human ships surrounded each of the 3 Valkyrie colony worlds. Vessels of a design that no one in the Concord had ever seen. Sleek and powerful and armed with weapons that made the Valkyrie defense fleets look like toys. But these were not warships preparing to attack. They were evacuation vessels. Their cargo bays open and ready to receive passengers. "What is this?" the matriarch demanded, her voice uncertain for the first time in her long reign. "This is your salvation," Chan said simply, "and the payment of humanity's debt to the Valkyrie people." He gestured to the screens, which now showed astronomical data that made the Valkyrie scientists in the room cry out in shock and horror. "Your son is dying, great matriarch, and has been dying for decades. Though you never knew, because we made certain you would not discover the truth until this moment. Impossible. Our scientists would have detected. Your scientists detected exactly what we wanted them to detect. Thanks to manipulation of your sensor networks and replacement of key personnel with individuals loyal to human intelligence services." The matriarch stared at him with something that might have been the beginning of fear. "The stellar collapse will reach critical stage in approximately 6 hours. Chum continued calmly, "At which point your homeworld and all 3 colonies will be bathed in radiation that will kill every living thing on their surfaces. You knew this and said nothing. We knew this and prepared for it, which is a very different thing." Chun walked closer to the throne, showing no fear of the massive beings that could have crushed him with a single blow. 300 years ago, you transported 8 billion humans to safety. And today we will transport 12 billion Valkyrie to safety. At a ratio that more than repays what we owe. Transport us where? To systems that we have been preparing for exactly this purpose. Worlds that our terraforming technology has made ready for your people. Located deep within human-controlled space where you will live as our guests. The word guests hung in the air with unmistakable meaning. The ships are waiting, Chun said. And I suggest your people begin boarding immediately. Because 6 hours is not a long time when an entire species must be evacuated. The matriarch rose from her throne, her full height making Chun look like a child standing before a giant. You planned this, she said slowly. For 300 years you planned to trap us like this. We planned for every possibility, great matriarch. Because we learned from watching the Concord that power comes to those who prepare, and patience is the greatest weapon of all. And if we refuse to board your ships, if we choose to die rather than become prisoners of a species we once saved, Chun's expression softened slightly, showing something that might have been genuine compassion. Then you will die, and your species will end, and the debt will remain unpaid, which would trouble humanity greatly, because we do not like leaving our obligations unfulfilled. He stepped back and spread his hands. We are offering you exactly what you offered us. Survival when extinction seemed certain. A new home when your old one could no longer sustain you. And the chance to continue existing in a galaxy that would have otherwise forgotten you. This is revenge. This is payment, Chun corrected gently. And the terms are far more generous than what you intended to demand from us. Because we are not asking for 1 million of your people as slaves. Only that all 12 billion of you accept our hospitality in return for the hospitality you once showed our ancestors. The matriarch looked at the screens, showing human ships waiting patiently around her doomed worlds. Looked at the astronomical data, proving that her son was indeed dying. Looked at the small humans standing before her without fear. Your species, she said finally, is nothing like what we believed. No, David Chun agreed. We are not, within the hour. The evacuation began. Word of what had happened spread through the Concord at the speed of light. carried by 1,000 communication channels to every species that had once considered humanity beneath their notice. The Valkyrie, greatest slavers in the galaxy, had been utterly defeated without a single shot being fired, and humanity had 10 more debts to pay. The decade that followed the Valkyrie evacuation became known throughout the galaxy as the Reckoning, a period when humanity paid every debt they owed with terrifying precision. The Thesan were the second to learn what human repayment looked like. They had demanded genetic samples from humanity, intending to add human DNA to their vast biological archives and perhaps create hybrid servants tailored to specific tasks, as they had done with dozens of species over millions of years. Ambassador Chun met with the Thesan High Council in their crystalline chambers, where living walls pulsed with the genetic information of countless species, and listened politely to their demands. You will provide us with complete genetic profiles of 100,000 humans, the chief geneticist declared, selected from across your population to ensure maximum diversity for our research programs. The Thesan gave us terraforming technology, Chum replied thoughtfully. And in return, you ask for biological samples. That is correct. Then humanity will provide biological samples of equal value to what was given. He placed a small container on the table between them, a cylinder no larger than his hand, filled with a shimmering liquid that seemed to move with purpose. What is this? The chief geneticist asked, reaching for the container with obvious curiosity. A bioweapon, Chun said calmly, specifically designed to target Thesan physiology and no other species in the galaxy. The product of 3 centuries of research into your genetic structure. The Thesan Council members recoiled in horror. Within that container is enough material to end your species entirely, Chun continued. Released into your atmosphere, it would spread across your worlds within days and kill every Thesan it encountered. You would commit genocide. We would prefer not to, Chun said. Which is why we have also brought the only cure. He placed a second container beside the first. Humanity offers you a choice. Take both containers as payment of our debt, the weapon and its counter, and use this knowledge to ensure that no one ever again threatens the Thesan with biological warfare. And what do you ask in return? Only that you treat all sapient beings in Thesan space with the respect they deserve, ending your experiments on unwilling subjects and your creation of biological servants from the genetic material of conquered peoples. The chief geneticist stared at the 2 containers for a long moment. If we refuse, then we keep the weapon and the cure, Chun said simply. And the debt remains unpaid, which would be unfortunate for everyone involved. The Thesan accepted humanity's payment and signed agreements that transformed their society within a generation. The Morthani were next. They controlled the jump gates that connected the galaxy, charging fees for their use and holding absolute power over which species could travel where. And their demand was simple. Humanity would pay a tithe of 20% of their territory for continued access to the gate. Network Chum met with the Morthani delegation aboard their flagship, a vessel of flowing silver that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Your terms are clear, he acknowledged. But humanity believes in paying exact values for what was received. And what value do you assign to access across the galaxy itself? Considerable, Chun admitted. Which is why we have prepared appropriate payment. He activated a holographic display that showed a network of glowing lines connecting every major system in human space, then expanding outward to touch Concord territory in dozens of locations. This is the Human Gate Network, he explained. Built over 2 centuries using principles we derived from studying your technology and then improved upon significantly. The Morthani delegation stared at the display with what might have been shock. Though their liquid forms made emotional interpretation difficult, our network bypasses Morthani-controlled space entirely, Chung continued. and we are prepared to open it to any species that wishes to travel without paying your fees or obeying your restrictions. You would destroy our economic dominance. We would offer fair competition, which your species has not faced in millions of years. Chun let it sink in before continuing. Alternatively, we could share access to our network with the Morthani specifically, creating a partnership that would benefit both our peoples rather than threatening your position. And the price of this partnership? Nothing more than fair treatment of all species wishing to travel, reasonable fees that do not exploit the desperate, and a voice for humanity in determining how the combined network is managed. The Morthani chose partnership over competition, and the galaxy suddenly had transportation options that had not existed for longer than most species could. Remember, the Yolkith demand was the most direct. They wanted soldiers. Their empire had been at war with neighboring powers for centuries, an endless conflict that consumed lives by the billions. And they saw humanity's debt as an opportunity to acquire fresh troops for their grinding campaigns. You will provide us with 500,000 combat personnel, the Yolkith War Marshal declared, equipped and trained at your expense and ready to serve wherever we deploy them. Humanity will provide soldiers. Chun agreed. As payment for the debt we owe, the Yolkith were surprised by this easy acceptance. Having expected negotiation or protest within a month, 5,000 human Special Forces operatives arrived at the Yolkith Military Command Center, the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. Trained in every form of warfare and equipped with technology that made Yolkith weapons look primitive. These are far fewer than we demanded. The War Marshal complained, quality over quantity. Chun explained, and these soldiers will do exactly what soldiers are meant to do. End wars. 3 days later, the entire Yolkith War Council was dead, killed in a coordinated operation that struck simultaneously across a dozen worlds with such precision that the Yolkith military command structure simply ceased to exist before the Yolkith could respond. A new government had already been installed, a peace faction that had been in secret contact with human intelligence services for generations. Leaders who immediately began negotiating an end to conflicts that had lasted longer than human civilization. You said you would provide soldiers to serve wherever we deployed them, the captured war marshal gasped as human operatives led him away. And they did serve, Chun replied. Just not in the way you expected, because the best way to end the war is not to fight it, but to remove the people who keep it going. One by one, the remaining members of the Concord faced humanity's repayment. Some accepted payment gracefully after seeing what had happened to others. Some tried to refuse and found that humanity insisted on honoring their obligations regardless of the creditor's wishes. Some attempted to unite against the human threat and discovered that their alliances had been undermined decades earlier by human agents placed in positions of influence throughout their governments. None of them escaped the debts they were owed when the final accounting was complete. The Concord of 12 existed only in history books, its member species scattered and diminished and forever changed by the experience of facing a humanity that had spent 3 centuries preparing for exactly these moments. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity was just getting started. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of humanity's first truly public space station, watching ships from 100 different species pass through the rebuilt jump gate network that now connected the galaxy in ways that had never been possible before. 5 years had passed since the last debt was paid, and the universe she looked upon was almost unrecognizable from the one she had grown up preparing to fight. The Concord of 12 was gone, not destroyed, not conquered, not exterminated, but simply dissolved like morning frost in sunlight. Its member species too divided and too thoroughly outmaneuvered to maintain the alliance that had dominated galactic politics for millions of years. In its place stood something new. Something that humanity had proposed and built and defended against those who said it could never work. They called it the Compact Assembly. Every species with faster-than-light capability had a seat. From the ancient powers that had once looked upon humanity with contempt to the youngest races, just beginning to explore beyond their home systems. And every seat held equal voting power regardless of how old or powerful the species that occupied it might be. "They still fear us," said a voice behind her. And Tanaka turned to see Ambassador David Chun approaching, older now and walking with a slight limp from an assassination attempt that had nearly succeeded 3 years ago. "Fear is not entirely unreasonable," Tanaka admitted. "Considering what we did to the Concorde, what we did was pay our debts. What we did was tear apart the established order of the galaxy and replace it with something that serves our interests." Chun stood beside her at the observation window, watching the same traffic of ships that she had been contemplating. "Our interests include a galaxy where no species can enslave another, where debts between peoples are forbidden by law, where the strong cannot prey upon the weak simply because they have the power to do so. Noble goals, practical goals," Chun corrected. "Because we remember what it felt like to be the weak ones, to be dying and desperate and forced to accept whatever terms the powerful chose to impose upon us." Tanaka nodded slowly, remembering her grandmother's stories of the evacuation from Earth, the fear and uncertainty and helplessness that had marked humanity's flight from their dying world. "Do you think they will ever trust us?" she asked. "The species we defeated, the Valkyria, already do, strangely enough, after we helped them establish their new civilization in the systems we provided. And the younger generation of their people has no memory of being masters of slaves, only of being saved by the species their ancestors once looked down upon. And the others, time will tell. But I believe that trust is possible when it is earned through actions rather than demanded through power." They stood in silence for a while, watching the galaxy go about its business. Species that had never cooperated before now trading and talking and traveling through networks that humanity had opened to everyone. "There is one matter that requires your attention," Chun said eventually. "A situation that I believe calls for your particular expertise." Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "Intelligence reports indicate that the Cathari homeworld is experiencing a catastrophic environmental collapse. Something about their primary food source failing across the entire planet simultaneously. The Catharia are the insectoid species in the outer rim." "Correct. The ones who only achieved faster-than-light travel about a decade ago." "Exactly. And they are currently broadcasting distress signals on every frequency, begging anyone who can hear them to provide assistance before their civilization collapses entirely." Tanaka felt something cold settle in her stomach as she remembered similar distress signals broadcast from Earth 3 centuries ago. "Let me guess," she said quietly. "They have nothing to offer in return for help. No resources or technology or strategic value that would make saving them worthwhile by the old Concorde's calculations. Nothing at all. They are a young species with limited development and no obvious value to anyone who thinks in terms of profit and power." And the Assembly's response, Chun smiled, an expression that carried genuine warmth rather than the calculated precision that had characterized his diplomatic career. "The Assembly has voted to provide immediate humanitarian assistance without conditions. The first such action in galactic history, funded by contributions from every member species, including the former Concorde powers. That is unexpected, perhaps, but humanity argued strongly for this course of action. And our voice carries considerable weight in the Assembly these days." Tanaka thought about what Chun was really telling her. The implications of a galaxy where the powerful helped the weak simply because they could, where debts and obligations were replaced by genuine cooperation and mutual aid. "We're sending ships," she said. "Not a question, were leading the relief effort personally. Admiral, with the largest humanitarian fleet ever assembled. And I have been asked to invite you to command the operation. Me, I'm a military officer, not a relief coordinator. You're the woman who spent her entire life preparing for wars that never happened because our planning made them unnecessary. And now I'm offering you the chance to save a species the same way we were once saved. Except this time there will be no compact, no debt, no obligation beyond simple decency. Tanaka turned back to the observation window, watching ships of every design imaginable passing through the gates that humanity had built and shared freely with the galaxy. Why? She asked finally. Why would we help them for nothing when we know better than anyone what can happen when you owe a debt you cannot pay? Because someone should have helped us that way 300 years ago, Chun said softly. And because we remember what it felt like when no one did. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, architect of the Ledger Protocol and commander of fleets that had never fired a shot in anger, made her decision. Prepare my ship, she said, and tell the Cathori that help is coming. The galaxy had trembled when humanity paid its debts, but it was the manner of the giving that came afterward. The help offered freely and the kindness shown without calculation. That truly changed everything. 300 years of preparation had made humanity powerful. What they chose to do with that power made them worthy of it. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a young species looked up at the sky and saw ships coming to save them. Ships crewed by beings who asked for nothing in return except the chance to be better than those who had come before. The debt was paid, the cycle was broken, and the galaxy, for the first time in its long history, began to learn what it meant to be truly civilized.